Hi everybody, so today I'm going to be talking about how food travels through the digestive system. And so I'm not going to draw the mouth, but for the most part, when you bring food in, we all know that you tear it apart, you break it down to smaller pieces, you mix it with saliva to moisten it, but also saliva contains an enzyme called amylase. And the amylase is basically going to start breaking down carbohydrates. So what's going to happen then in the mouth is you chew the food, you turn into something called the bolus, and then you swallow the bolus. It goes into your pharynx, which is your throat, and then you swallow the bolus, right? And it's gonna go down to your stomach. So let's start off, I'm gonna start off talking about the esophagus, okay? So for the most part, the esophagus is about 10 to 13 inches long, and it carries food, or a bolus, from the pharynx to the stomach, okay? And I'm just gonna write the word bolus right here, just because if you've never heard of it, that's how it's spelled. Okay, and again, so this is going to be my esophagus. So now, here's what's going to happen. As the esophagus comes down, it's going to have to get to the stomach, but it has to go past the diaphragm. So I'm going to draw the diaphragm right here, right? And there's my diaphragm. And there's an opening in the diaphragm, which we are going to call the esophageal hiatus. So here's my esophageal hiatus right here, and that's the opening in the diaphragm that you see, so the esophagus can go down, right? So this is an opening in diaphragm where esophagus passes through. Okay, so now, the next thing that's going to happen is my esophagus is going to come down, and it's going to go into the stomach, right? The bolus would come down and go into the stomach. So I'm going to draw the stomach, all right? And I'm going to draw the stomach like this. And here's the thing, is at the bottom of my esophagus, I am going to have a round circular muscle that's down here, and I have a few of these in the body. And this is going to be called the cardiac sphincter. So this is my cardiac sphincter. And again, this is at the bottom of the esophagus right here. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to keep contents from the stomach from going back up the other way, right? Because remember, the stomach's going to be mixing things around with acid, and we don't want it going up into the esophagus. When it does, we call that heartburn, right? Or acid reflux, right? So that's going to be the cardiac sphincter. And then this area of the stomach where you see this, we actually call this the cardia, right? So that's the cardia. And then over here, you'll notice there's this hump. We call this the fundus, okay? Inside the stomach, we are going to have little infoldings that kind of make like little waves in there, and we're going to call this rugae. That's those little waves that are in there. And then this area down here, we are going to call the pylorus. Let's go from this side. This is going to be the pylorus, okay? So now, here's the thing about the stomach, is if you notice right here, we have this real big curve. So we're gonna call this part the greater curvature, right? This is gonna be my greater curvature, all right? And then coming off the greater curvature, we are going to have like a fatty tissue. This is basically going to serve two functions. It helps protect against infections and inflammation, but it's also going to connect the stomach to the colon. And we're going to call this the greater omentum. Okay, so that's the greater omentum that's right there. And this connects the stomach to the colon. And remember, the colon is just another name for the large intestine. Now, if we have a greater omentum, if we have a greater curvature, this is going to be my lesser curvature. So this would be the lesser curvature. All right, and then what's going to happen is I am going to have my lesser omentum. So this is going to be the lesser omentum right here, and that's going to connect the stomach to the liver. Okay, so now, what's going to happen now is the stomach is going to come down, and we're going to get something, we're going to have the pylorus here, and then we're going to have another circular muscle that's right in here. And this circular muscle is what we call the pyloric sphincter. So there's my pyloric sphincter that's going to be right there. And then coming out the pyloric sphincter is I am going to have the duodenum. So this is going to be the small intestine. All right, right there. And so this is my small intestine, right? And the first part of the small intestine we call the duodenum. There's 3 parts to the small intestine, okay? And this is the duodenum. Now, let's back up real quick, because I already said what's going to happen is we are going to start absorbing or breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth. We're going to start breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth. When this bolus gets to the stomach, we're going to start breaking down the bolus, and it's going to be made into a soupy material that we're going to call chyme. Okay, we're going to call this chyme, right? So what's going to happen also, we release acid, so we're going to start breaking down proteins in the stomach. So we start breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth. We start breaking down proteins in the stomach. Then, when the food comes out of the stomach, this chyme, when the chyme comes out of the stomach and enters into the duodenum, we're going to start basically breaking down fats into fatty acids so they can be absorbed. So that's going to be in the duodenum. So again, we start breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth, we start breaking down proteins in the stomach, and then we start breaking down fats in the duodenum of the small intestine. Now, after the duodenum, we're going to have a portion of this, and this is going to be called the jejunum. Okay, so that's the jejunum right there. Then after, by the way, and this is not to scale, your small intestine is going to be about 22 feet long. Then after the jejunum, you're going to have what we call the ileum. And here's my ileum. Okay? Now, if you notice, these are in segments. The ileum is in segments, or the small intestine, right? My jejunum and my ileum are going to be in segments. We call this segmentation. This is called segmentation. And the reason we have this is because as chyme comes through here, it gets moved back and forth in these segments so we can continue breaking down food, and we can mix it with digestive juices so it can be absorbed. So in segmentation, we move the chyme back and forth so we can break it down, and we can mix it with digestive juices so it can be absorbed. Okay? So we break food down, right? And again, it's called chyme, I'm saying food, and we mix it with, I'm just gonna say chemicals, it's digestive juices, right? So it can be absorbed, right? So that's what's gonna happen in the small intestine. Now, segmentation is different than peristalsis. Peristalsis is just meant to move the food towards the anus. Segmentation, again, is to move it back and forth, so therefore, we can mix it with digestive juices and break it down more to make it easier to absorb. When we get to the end of the ileum, so this part, all in red, is going to be my ileum, right? This is all ileum here. When we get to the end of the ileum, what's going to happen is it's going to meet up with the large intestine. Now the small intestine is going to be about 22 feet long. The large intestine is only about 5 feet long. The reason the large intestine is called the large intestine is because of the fact that it's a wider diameter than the small intestine. The first part of the large intestine is something that we call the cecum, and then coming off of the cecum is something you've heard of before, and it's actually more towards the back, but this is going to be called the appendix. Okay, so there's our appendix right there. And you've probably heard of appendicitis. Okay, so there's the appendix right there. The cecum is going to be part of something called the ascending colon. So here comes, this is actually going to be going around the small intestine, but here comes my ascending colon right here. And remember, the word colon just means large intestine. And then it's going to go across the front of the body. So it's going to transverse the front of the body. Okay, so we're going to call this our, our transverse colon. Okay, this is all transverse colon right here. Let's see if I can squeeze that in here to make it a little easier to understand. There we go, transverse colon. Then when we get over here, we have something called the splenic flexure. Right here would be my splenic flexure because the spleen's right there and it's just flexing, right? And then it's going to come down and we're going to call this the descending colon. And then it's going to make a turn towards the center of the body. And we're going to call this portion that's right here, we're going to call that our sigmoid. Right? Or you can call it sigmoid colon if you want. Then what's going to happen is at the sigmoid, we're going to make a turn and we're going to have something called the rectum. All right, so that's the rectum. You've probably heard of that before. And then the rectum is going to go down and it's going to have the anus. Right? So this, you're going to have your anus right here. Okay? Now, here's the thing about the anus. You have two sphincters on the anus. You have an internal sphincter and an external sphincter. So we have an internal sphincter, which is going to be right there, and we have an external sphincter, which is going to be right there. Okay, so that's going to be the anus, and then we know what happens after that. So one more thing I want to go over is if we look in the small intestine, you'll also see like a fatty material that's in here. We call it mesentery. And mesentery is basically designed to help hold the small intestine together. So we're going to have like this fatty tissue that's in there. And remember, this is not to scale because my small intestine is going to be about 22 feet long. So that's it for how food passes through the body. If you like the video, please hit the like and subscribe button, and we will catch you next time. I'm going to leave this up here for just a minute.